Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our Classes Without Quizzes. My name is Sue Pryor. I am the manager for alumni relations here at UTM, and I'm also a very proud graduate. I'd like to say hello to all those people who are watching on webinar from across Ontario, and I think we have someone here from Edmonton, Alberta. Thank you for watching, and we have someone from California. I hope things are all well with you in California. So, as I said, my name is Sue Pryor, and I'd like to extend my warmest welcome to all of you, our alumni, our friends, and our greatest supporters. Classes Without Quizzes is a series of compelling lectures that bring the teaching and research excellence of UTM faculty and alumni communities across the GTA, Canada, and around the globe. Tonight we are going to hear from alumnus Fahad Tariq. Fahad is the founder and CEO of Shift, a revolutionary nonprofit that applies biomimicry to convert animal waste into clean energy in developing countries. Shift currently has 10 projects underway, helping hundreds of people in remote villages access to safe cooking gas while also protecting the environment. Fahad has received the prestigious Ascend Rising Star Award and Ivy Emerging Leaders Award. He also holds a BCom from the U of T Mississauga and an MBA from Ivy Business School at Western, and he's a CPA and a CA. For this evening's lecture, he will be discussing how to change poo into power. Please join me in welcoming alumnus Fahad Tariq as he shares his amazing story.
All right, thank you very much, Sue, for that kind introduction and for inviting me to speak. I always enjoy being back on campus, and it's always a pleasure. So what are we going to talk about today? So I thought the best way to structure this talk would be to think about it the way we used to learn in elementary school when we investigate something. It's the 5 W's and how. But we're going to do it in a different order. So we'll start with the who, the why, what, how, and the where and the when. The meat of the discussion is going to be the why, what, and how. So I'll start with who, a little bit about myself. Not because I like talking about myself. I actually don't. I hate talking about myself. In the interview, when you get asked that question, tell me a little bit about yourself, that's like the question I dread the most. But I think it's important when we talk about ideas to talk about the motivations of the people behind those ideas so we can learn a little bit more about how it came about. And then I'll talk about kind of the critical questions, the why, the what, and the how. So how does this technology work? How does the science work? And what are the problems that it's solving? And then I'll close with the where we're operating right now as a nonprofit, and the when, our growth timeline, what we've accomplished so far. So let's get started. So who? I think we're undeniably shaped by our experiences, our lived experiences, in ways that we can't really understand until we reflect on it later in life. And when I sit down and I reflect about what compelled me to start Shift, I think a lot about my childhood, and more specifically, the fact that I grew up in multiple countries. And I think that really shaped who I am. So I was born in Kuwait in 1988, and then the Gulf War happened. So my family had to flee the country, and so we went to Pakistan, and then to the United Arab Emirates. And then we came all the way to Canada when I was 8 years old. And so that experience really gave me a global perspective in that, one, I saw that Canada was so different than where other parts of the world that I had seen, where there wasn't even electricity. And so I was always grateful for the fact that I was here, but I also realized there was this huge inequality between where I was and where I had been. And that was something I always wanted to address in a meaningful way. And it gave me this kind of global mindset in that I wanted to have an impact not on a local level, but something globally. And so that was something that was always kind of percolating in the back of my mind. The second thing about moving to so many countries is that I saw my parents really learn to navigate each time they moved to a different country. So you learn a new language, you navigate the job market, you figure out housing, all those things that are challenges for newcomers. But I saw them, be flexible and adjust. And to me, I think that really opened me up to taking risks. And that's something that's really important when you're an entrepreneur or you're starting a nonprofit, is that you have to be a risk taker. And I thought about why is it that I wanted to do something so crazy and out of the box. It's because I saw people in my life who had done something like that already, that they were willing to take risks to, in this case for their family, but, were willing to take risks nonetheless. So these are just, I've never done any psychoanalysis about my childhood, but when I think about it, these are some of the things I think about. And I think that's part of why I am who I am and why I started Shift. There's one moment though I want to highlight, like a singular moment that really pushed me to start Shift, because there's a lot of people who have ideas and then it takes a catalyst for them to launch it. And for me, this happened when I was pursuing my MBA. And one of the classes I took, it was called Transformational Leadership. It's a really ambitious course. And, this is business school, but this was a pretty philosophical course. So we actually sat down and we thought about our deepest motivations as people. What character traits we had, what character traits we wanted, and what type of leader we wanted to be. Long story short, we had an assignment for this class where we had to write a letter to our future self. And what would happen is you write this letter to your future self and then it gets sealed and put away. And 1 year later, no sooner or no later than that, you would get this letter in your inbox. And so I wrote this letter to myself and I sent it to the professor, and then I kind of forgot about it. You go about your life. I started a new job, and life was going on. And then a year later, I got this letter in my inbox. And when I saw the professor's email and I saw the subject, I kind of had this like sinking feeling in my stomach, because I remembered some of the things I wrote in that letter. And part of it was, I hope you've accomplished certain goals and objectives. And I thought to myself, yeah, I don't know if I've really done any of that yet. And so I was nervous to open the letter. But I want to share with you, it's a little personal, but I want to share with you what I wrote in the letter. And I'll give you a minute to read this. So when I got this was part of a bigger letter, but when I got this in my inbox, it like really hit me hard. It was kind of a wake-up call, because I was in a job that was, intellectually stimulating. I really enjoyed it. I paid the bills, but this core part of me that wanted to do something to make the world a better place, that was missing. And so I got this letter, and it really, the idea of Shift was there, and we'll talk a bit about that. And when I got this letter a few days later, that's when I launched Shift as a nonprofit, and I registered it in Canada. So this was a very powerful moment for me. I also want to take a step back and highlight another why. So why Shift? Why this idea of repurposing what we call waste into something that could be useful, energy? And the answer to that is because I believe the future is a circle. Now, I'm not a very smart person. I make up for it by being very hardworking. So I tend to think of the world in very simplistic terms. And when I think about the future of human endeavors, I really think the world is going to be a circle. And what I mean by that is, as you look out into the world and you see, all the resources that we have, whether it's fresh water, arable land, oil, anything, it's all becoming increasingly scarce. And so I think in order for us to tackle the problems of tomorrow, we're going to have to start thinking more carefully about how can we repurpose things that already exist and create new outputs from existing inputs. So I'll say that again. How can we create new outputs from existing inputs? And this philosophy is what really motivated me to pursue the idea of Shift. And even before I thought about waste to energy, I always thought, if I wanted to make the world a better place and I wanted to do something, I always wanted it to be a circular kind of idea, something that could come full circle and use resources that are already out there instead of trying to create something new. And one of the really good ways of doing this is actually to look at nature. So nature has this elegant efficiency, if you call it. When there's a certain way that nature produces output that's actually very elegant and beautiful. And so the technical term of this is called biomimicry. It's a really fancy word. It really just means copying nature. And so what does Shift copy? So Shift actually copies the stomach of a cow. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next few slides, but what we're copying is this biological process of breaking down, in the case of a cow's stomach, breaking down the food material and extracting energy from it. And that same kind of biological process we're replicating outside the cow's stomach. And so that's one way of thinking about using existing inputs to create new outputs. Okay, so let's get into the meat of it. So what are the problems that Shift is solving? So I'll talk about the two problems we're solving and then the one solution. So Shift is actually solving two huge global problems. The first of which is climate change. Now, many people don't know this, but 15% of greenhouse gas emissions come from animals, which is actually more than cows, or sorry, more than cars. And it's something that I think is neglected when we talk about climate change. We focus a lot on transportation and the emissions caused by that, but we don't really talk about animals and the agricultural industry and livestock industry and how much that is contributing to greenhouse gases. So that's a huge part of the equation. And then within that, 60% of animal emissions actually come from cows. And that's the market that, for lack of a better word, that Shift is cornering. We're capturing and repurposing the waste from cows and capturing that methane that would normally be released into the atmosphere. We're actually turning it into something usable. People talk a lot about carbon dioxide emissions. Methane emissions are actually 30 times more harmful in terms of trapping heat in our environment, in our atmosphere, than carbon dioxide. And so what we're addressing is that the methane emissions from the cows. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, cows are the problem, so why don't people just change their diet? You've heard about reducing meat and dairy intake. And, you call me a skeptic, but I think changing people's behavior on such a large scale when it becomes to the point where it would have a meaningful impact is very difficult. And of course, that's something that we need to do and ought to do. But for me, the way I think about it, I think a more expedient and feasible way of addressing this problem is why not capture the methane emissions to begin with and repurpose them. There's 1.5 billion cows in the world. They're producing a lot of waste. And so it's easier to capture those methane emissions than to try to change people's behavior dramatically in terms of diet and nutrition. The second major problem that we're addressing is energy insecurity. This may surprise you, but 38% of the world's population still uses unsafe forms of energy. And by that, I mean people still go out every day and they find firewood, they cut down trees, they find firewood, they bring it back and they burn it in their homes. And this actually, this whole process leads to about 3.5 million preventable deaths a year. And the reason for that is because if you imagine you're living in a home that has very poor ventilation in some of these developing countries, you're burning this firewood, you're inhaling tons of it. And so it's having a detrimental impact on your lungs and also damaging your eyes. And so this is a huge global problem that needs to be discussed a lot more. And so the solution that we're providing through the cow waste is clean cooking gas that would be a clean, healthy, safer alternative to firewood because it doesn't have that same smoke inhalation problem. So how does it work? So this is the money slide. This is going to explain how the magic happens. When I tell people about turning poo into power, they think it's like alchemy or something. I'm a magician, but it's really a relatively simple biochemical process. That's it's not something new. It's been done for a long time, and I'll talk a little bit about if it's been done before, what is Shift doing? I'll touch on that, but let me talk first about how it works. So first, the waste needs to be stored in what's known as an anaerobic, which is a fancy word for oxygen-free environment. And when that happens, you have specific bacteria that naturally develop. They're called methanogenic bacteria. They break down the waste and they turn it into biogas. That biogas then rises to the top of the dome, and we can pipe it to people's homes. And then the fourth step is those homes are able to use the gas and burn it. Just like if you have a gas stove at home, it's the exact same technology. But on a simpler scale. And if you have enough cows, you can also use a generator to turn that gas into electricity. So then the question arises, okay, well, you said that this is an age-old technology, so then what are you doing differently? And people ask, did you come up with this process? And the answer is no. I didn't develop this magical process. and Shift would never claim that because that wouldn't be accurate. But what we're doing is something different. So we're doing three things. First, we're popularizing this technology. I don't know how many people in this room knew about being able to turn waste into energy. I didn't many years ago. And so I think a lot of people still don't know about this technology, even though it has so many benefits and it can work in developing countries really, really well. And so the first thing is we're trying to popularize this on a global scale. The second thing we're doing is we're actually improving the underlying technology. So I'm working with the University of Toronto, as well as the University of Saskatchewan to develop a better technology to make the conversion process more efficient. So what you see on this slide, just imagine it kind of superpowered with more technology. And the third thing we're doing is we're making this model scalable. So it can be applied in farming communities around the world. The idea is, you want to build a technology that you can kind of expand or contract depending on how big the farm is or the community is. You can, we want this technology to work whether you have 20 cows or whether you have a dairy farm in Ontario that has 300 cows. That's the idea. So popularize that technology, or popularize the science behind the technology, improve the technology, and make it scalable. Those are the three things that Shift is doing. Let's talk a little bit about the impact. So I'll touch on three levels of impact because this is how we like to think about it. So you have the individual impact, the community impact, and the global impact. At the individual level, we're providing clean cooking gas for free. And we bear the cost of building this infrastructure, and then people benefit from the free gas. So not only are they getting cooking gas, that same gas can actually be used in lanterns. And this has a tremendous benefit in these villages because it provides lighting at nighttime. So normally, I'll talk a bit about when I visited some of these villages last year, but when you go normally at nighttime, once it's sunset, that's it, your day's done. There's nothing more you can do. You can sit around and talk, but there's nothing more productive that can be done because there's just no lighting. And so this is now providing lighting at nighttime that allows students, younger children to read perhaps, or people to work a bit longer or be more productive. And so that's really important. And then just to touch on that, one of the things, people say, oh, well, there's solar panels, right? Like, why can't we put solar panels in these villages for the same problem? So when I went to this village in Pakistan last year, there was one solar panel, but one is so expensive, and you'll see in some of the pictures I show you that the roofs on these houses are just straw. So like the solar panel is hard to put up there. You have to put it on the ground. So one, there's a risk that people will steal it. Unfortunately, they have expensive parts, and people are desperate when economic conditions aren't the best. And so there's a risk that it'll be stolen. And secondly, it actually doesn't have that much output. I asked one of the people in the village, I said, okay, well, that's a nice solar panel, but what does it power? And they said one light bulb in one house, right? And so it's not the most efficient use, and it is very costly. So I just wanted to touch on that as in terms of why that alternative didn't make sense to me, but it's all part of the equation of trying to improve the livelihood of these people. The second thing is at the community level. So what I love about the process is that there's nothing wasted in it. Even the residual waste that's in the energy dome gets used as fertilizer. So once the biogas has gone to the top of the dome, it's been piped to people's houses, there's still waste left over in the dome. So what do you do with that? You actually just take it out and you can throw it onto the fields, and it's actually very nutritious, organic fertilizer for the farm. So nothing gets wasted. And again, we talked about the improved productivity from reliable energy access. And then on the final kind of larger scale, the global level, again, we're talking about preventing climate change by capturing these methane emissions. And this is, of course, an existential threat. I think we're coming more to terms with the fact that this is probably the biggest challenge of our lifetime. And so addressing it is critical. And there's different facets of trying to address it. I'm saying this is a big part of it. And then also we're saving millions of lives by providing a safer energy source, clean gas instead of firewood. And so we're diminishing energy insecurity. So I have to say at this point, I am an accountant by training. Sue mentioned that. And so I have to mention some numbers about our impact. I feel like if I don't mention numbers, they like take away my license or something. So let me talk a little bit about some of the numbers. So Sue had mentioned this, that we have 10 projects on the ground right now. Those 10 projects are capturing 500,000 kilograms of cow waste every year, which is a lot of cow waste. we're saving 1,500 hours a year of people not having to go out and collect firewood. So they can now use this time for more economic and useful activities, or just spending time with the family. So that's something that's really important. And we're providing free gas to, free clean cooking gas to 500 people right now. And last, and certainly not least, is something that we're really proud of at Shift, is that we're adding life expectancy to people's lives because they have healthier outcomes now. They don't have to inhale that wood smoke. It doesn't cause the respiratory problems. It actually adds life expectancy. I know some of you are looking at this slide and like, okay, there's 3 numbers, but that 4th one doesn't have a number to it. It's because it's actually really hard to measure that. So we know we're adding life expectancy based on survey results, and we're improving health outcomes, but it's something that's really hard to measure in terms of, are you adding 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years? There's so many factors that play into it. And so I'm always hesitant to put a number that I haven't completely backed up or that the team hasn't backed up. So we're looking into that. And so that's something that I just want to point that out in case you were wondering, well, how many years? We don't know yet, but we're happy that we are helping people have better health outcomes, and we're in the process of measuring that more accurately. So we talked a little bit about what we've accomplished so far with the 10 projects, and it's been a really great journey. We're so happy and so proud of the work that we've done. But I want to talk about the journey before these great outcomes happen, which is, how did Shift get started? And I always like telling the story in terms of 3 failures, because entrepreneurs and people who start nonprofits, they like to say, well, I did this, this, and this, and I was always successful. And that's never the case, or at least it wasn't the case with me. So I failed 3 times, 3 big failures. And I wanted to mention each of those failures and what I learned from them. And that's a key point, which is when you start something in terms of a nonprofit, entrepreneurial ventures, you're trying a new initiative at work, whatever it may be, you will fail. This is like a guaranteed outcome. But the difference between the people who are successful and who are not are the people who bounce back from those failures. So I'll mention the failures and then what I learned from them, which is a key point, that failures are data points to learn from. So the first failure is I lost the Hult Prize. So the Hult Prize, for those of you who don't know, is a social enterprise competition that's among students at both the undergraduate and graduate level. And the winning prize is actually $1 million. And so the way it works is every year Bill Clinton issues a challenge to all universities saying, there's a particular social challenge they're tackling. And then students come up with all these ideas. They go through multiple rounds. And if you win, you get $1 million to start your idea. So it's a huge, huge competition. So 2 years ago, I was doing my MBA and I put together a team to compete in the Hult Prize. And I started scouring the internet for research. And I came across this one paper by the United Nations that talked about the energy potential of human waste. The energy potential of human waste. And so I sat there thinking, I was like, okay, it's from the United Nations, so this has to be pretty accurate. But it's just so crazy. Like, I've never heard of this before. Like, how can you convert human waste into energy? And so that was something that it just like struck me. I was shocked. I'm like, this should be the front page of every newspaper. It's so simple, so scalable. There's human waste everywhere, clearly. And so why aren't people doing more with it? And so we went with that idea for the competition. So our initial idea for the competition was, what we'd do is we'd go into Indian slums, so slums in India, and we'd build these specialized toilets. And those specialized toilets would capture the human waste and convert it into energy and allow people to improve their incomes. Sorry, I forgot to mention. So the year we entered the competition, the challenge was very vague. It was just improving people's incomes. So the people who make the lowest income in the world, how do you increase their income? So that was our idea. You build these specialized toilets, you convert human waste into energy. So we fly to London, England. We participate in the competition. There's hundreds of teams there, and we present to the judges. We've done a lot of research into the idea. We get a lot of questions from the judges, which is always a good sign. And we could tell from the audience's reaction, they really liked this idea. It was something that they hadn't heard before. We knew our stuff, and the idea was just so crazy that people thought it just might work. And so they announced that we've made it to the finals now. So 6 out of 100 teams were selected, and we were one of them. So we were really ecstatic. We presented one last time, and we have a really good feeling. We have a really, really good idea, well-researched, and we lost. Right? We lost the competition. We didn't make it forward. And it's tough because, it's easy to look back now and say, oh, it's fine. Like you see the graph, it eventually goes up. But in that moment, you feel pretty bad because you spent months in researching something and you put your heart into it and it just didn't work out the way you expected. But what we did do was we asked the judges for feedback. And what they told us was, you didn't think enough about how your solution was differentiated, meaning that there were one or two nonprofits in Africa that were doing something similar. They were using porta potties, public toilets, to convert human waste into fertilizer. So something similar. And so the takeaway for me and for our team was, when you're starting something new, you have to really survey the landscape and figure out what your competitive advantage is. What is it that you're doing better than everyone else? And what are you doing differently than anyone else? And so that was a key takeaway for us. So fast forward after graduation from my MBA, I get to my second failure, which is human waste is deemed impractical. So here I am, I've graduated, I have a job, but the idea is still stuck with me. I thought, there's something here. I want to do something with this. So I'm contacting people in India and Pakistan, trying to get feedback for the idea, trying to find partners on the ground. And I keep getting the same feedback over and over again. Human waste is disgusting. Nobody wants to deal with it. Nobody wants to handle it. There's a social stigma around it. And so, you hit this wall, and then what you need to, like my takeaway from this was, you really need to be flexible when you hit a wall like that and learn to pivot. And I had to really take a step back and think, well, okay, so I like the idea of turning waste into energy, but it doesn't have to be human waste. It could be cow waste, it could be animal waste. And so I had to pivot my idea because I knew that farmers were already dealing with animal waste. Most farmers, they'll pick it up with a shovel and put it into the fields. And so I knew farmers were comfortable with it. And I pivoted. And I think that's the key takeaway here is, there will be times when you really hit a wall and there's just so many hurdles, and instead of trying to scale the wall, you have to build a door or walk around or whatever, however the analogy you want to think about it is, you just have to pivot and you have to think about it differently and be flexible to trying something different. So that was what we ended up doing. So we pivoted from human waste to animal waste because there was a social stigma associated with dealing with human waste. And then the third failure, I can't put a team together. So here I am, I have this doable idea now. Animal waste is, more feasible. It can be done in developing countries, but I can't put a team together. My colleagues from the MBA program, they've started their new jobs, and, I can't ask them to drop everything and fly to India or Pakistan with me and, take this off the ground. But I knew I needed a team. The saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with a team. And for a shift, I always wanted it to go far. And so I needed a team. So the takeaway for me was I needed a compelling pitch, that if I made this pitch to people who were interested in the idea, that they would join, that they would buy into the vision of what Shift was trying to do and help us get there. So here's my pitch. I actually wrote it down and I thought about it. What would be compelling? So here's what I came up with. Shift will be the first organization in the world to build scalable energy domes that can convert animal waste into clean energy to solve two of the most pressing problems facing humanity: climate change and energy insecurity. So I hustled my personal network and I found people in Pakistan that would actually help me on the ground to scout locations and get this off the ground. And then in addition to that, I wanted people on my advisory board that would really be a good sounding board, but also add credibility to the organization. So I made a list of 4 people that were like the superstars of the waste to energy movement. And I cold called all 4 of them with this sales pitch and some other material. And I got all 4 of them to say yes. And I think a big part of that was having this compelling sales pitch and really knowing what I wanted to do, what the vision of Shift was, and selling it that way. And once we got those 4 advisory members on our team, overnight we became the most credible organization when it came to waste to energy in the nonprofit world. And including, and this is interesting how things kind of come full circle, but one of the people on our advisory board is actually the person who authored that first paper by the United Nations that I read years ago. And so I reached out to her and I asked her, I said, listen, I read your paper 2 years ago And, I started Shift, and I want you on board, and she came on board and remains on board and is a valuable mentor to me. So that's the journey of starting Shift explained in 3 failures. Next, I want to talk about the where. So we're starting in Pakistan, and the reason for that is both personal and tactical. So personal because I grew up in Pakistan and I knew there were villages there that could use this technology and could benefit from it. Because I knew there were people who were living in conditions that we can't even imagine here. And second was tactical because I had connections on the ground that could help me implement this. So those are the 2 factors. And part of the where, I want to actually share a personal story about someone I met last year when I visited the village. Her name is Fatima. She lives in a small village about 5 hours outside of Karachi, Pakistan, where she lives in a small hut. You can actually see the hut. So I took this picture. This is not like a Google stock picture or anything. I took this when I was there. You can see the hut. It has a door, but no windows, which is really important to notice. And then a straw roof. And so without me even going any further, you can probably pinpoint like 100 things wrong with trying to start a fire inside that house. So Fatima and other women in the village, they actually spend hours every day collecting firewood and then burning it to cook meals 3 times a day. We talked a bit about this, but the firewood produces a lot of smoke and it collects inside this home that again has no ventilation, and it damages their eyes and their lungs. So Fatima at the young age of 14 actually contracted tuberculosis and had to be taken to the hospital because of the wood smoke inhalation. And so, it's sad, but we weren't there in time to help her. But what we're trying to do is use the cows that are in Fatima's village to produce a cleaner alternative so that cases like hers never happen again. And her story is not unique. It's really not. There's millions of people every year who die from unsafe energy use. Let's turn to the when. So what's next in terms of our growth? So we have 10 projects on the ground in operation. We're hoping to get to 15 by the end of the year and then double it to 30 next year. In terms of funding sources, last year it was mostly friends and family. I reached out to my personal network. This year it was a very successful crowdfunding campaign. So we actually did a really successful Indiegogo campaign. It's like Kickstarter, but more nonprofit oriented. And we were actually able to raise over 100% of our goal in 3 weeks, which was incredible. And then next year, the goal is to start getting more institutional funding. So governments, private donors, private grants, and things like that. And so we're really excited. The idea is not to be, Shift is not a Pakistan project. I don't want anyone to think that. We started there, and it's important that we continue to work there, but our goal is to expand elsewhere. One of the countries we're actually looking into now is Uganda, where similar circumstances and similar villages. And so with the similar problems of energy insecurity, climate change, no lighting. And so we're trying to address that as well. So I want to close shortly, but I want to go back to this idea of the future as a circle. And I intended the pun that I circled back to the circle. So I wanted everyone to recognize that. I put that on purpose. In order for us to really tackle climate change and really tackle energy insecurity and really tackle the hundreds of other problems that exist out there, I think we really need to start thinking of ways to repurpose what already exists to make the world a better place. Again, trying to use existing inputs in different ways. So I wanted to show you a short video of the work that Shift is doing in Pakistan. It's like a mini documentary. And so, sit back and enjoy it. But I do want to preface the video with one thing, and you guys will all notice it right away. So in the video, I'm very prominently wearing an IV t-shirt. And the reason I did that was because the idea came up while I was doing this competition there. And the irony doesn't escape me that I'm at a different university right now. But I have fond memories of my time at UTM, and a lot of what I ended up doing was shaped during my time here. And so I just wanted to say that because it's awkward. Otherwise, you'll see the video and you'll wonder why I'm not wearing a University of Toronto t-shirt. But for the next video, I will do that. But here, I just want to start the video and just sit back and enjoy this. Do I have internet access? No? Okay, I can come back to it. It's okay. Maybe I'll show the video after the presentation. I can tell you a little bit about what's in the video. So basically you see where we were in Pakistan, and there's some testimonials from the people. If I don't get a chance to show it after the Q&A, then maybe just YouTube, if you just YouTube shift waste, it'll come up. And I wanted to leave quite like 20 minutes for Q&A, so I'll end with this. I'll end with a quote that I read actually recently. It's called, the quote goes, "I arise in the morning torn between a desire to improve the world and a desire to enjoy the world. This makes it difficult to plan the day." As a writer, E.B. White, who wrote that. And most people put quotes they agree with or it resonates with them. I actually disagree with this quote. And the reason I disagree with this quote is because, at least from my experience, when you start improving the world or making some sort of difference that's positive in someone else's life, it really engenders an appreciation and an ability to enjoy what you have in your life. And so I don't think this dichotomy really exists. I think both go hand in hand. I think when you improve the world, you actually end up enjoying the world. And I hope that in your individual lives, you find ways to make a positive contribution to make the world a better place. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you. I'm happy to take Q&A. I wanted to make sure I had enough time to answer questions. And then maybe in the meantime, if we can, maybe we'll try to get the video going. If not, again, just if you go on YouTube, you'll be able to find it. But happy to take questions. You can ask me anything about what we're doing. Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the human body is actually very efficient. And so the short answer is cow waste generally has more energy potential. Also, there's just a lot more cow waste. Cows produce quite a bit of waste every day. Human waste is just from a like volume perspective, this sounds so disgusting, but like from a volume perspective, it just doesn't compare to cow waste. Like there's just so much more cow waste. You know, in our energy domes, we're loading 150 kilos of waste every day, which is only coming from about 30 cows. Like that's a lot of waste. Humans just don't produce that volume. And second, you know, we're looking into it, but it is that the energy potential within the cow waste is actually better than human waste. It's just the nutritional aspects are different. The human body is actually quite efficient at breaking down and extracting all the energy. And so there isn't much left over. Now, that's not to say that it can't be done. It's clearly being done by some other nonprofits in Africa. And what they're doing is just a volume game. They have so many porta potties set up in the village. And it's such a large radius that they're just getting a bunch of waste. They collect it maybe once a month instead of every day like we are with the cow waste. So they're collecting it maybe once a month and sending it to like a central facility to process. So it can be done. And, you know, my grand vision and our grand vision for Shift is that someday, you know, the city of Toronto or the city of Mississauga would kind of work this into their municipal sewage system so that every house, without you even noticing, the waste would get collected and turn it into energy and electricity and heating. It's totally doable. It sounds crazy and radical, but it's totally doable. It's just a matter of pitching that and making a compelling business case for it. Just speaking of human waste, I do want to make a shameless plug. So the project that we're doing in Uganda, you know, I talked about human waste and how I had to step away from it, but the project we're doing in Uganda is actually a human waste project. And the reason for that is because in that community in Africa, it's actually not so much a social stigma as it is in the Indian subcontinent. In the Indian subcontinent, when we did our research, this is, it's interesting, there's so much sociology behind it, but when you talk to people in India, they say that only certain caste members or certain classes of society are allowed to deal with waste. So that automatically reduces kind of who can work for on behalf of Shift and things like that. That doesn't exist in Africa. And that's why it's been successful in countries like Kenya and Uganda. The United Nations expert that we have on our board, she actually did a human waste project in Kenya and Uganda, actually. So So it can be done. It's a matter of navigating the social stigma and the cultural barriers. So the next project in Uganda we're actually doing is really exciting. It's a school with 700 students. And what we're building is a covered, like full toilet facility, like washroom facility. And the washroom will collect the human waste from the students at the school. And they have a cafeteria, and so it'll power the gas stoves in the cafeteria. So again, avoiding the wood smoke and things like that. And we're looking into it. If there's enough energy, it can actually provide the electricity for the school. It's a really, really cool project. And you know, it solves all the same problems and one more, which is for girls going to this school, they've done studies that show if there's improved sanitation facilities, it actually increases enrollment from 2/3 boys to 50-50 boys and girls. So there's some really good research behind this, and it's just another added benefit that you have if you have clean cooking facility or clean washroom facilities. It actually has an impact on girls' enrollment, which has multiple impacts in the society. And so that's a really exciting project that we're working on. If anyone's interested in finding out more or helping us fund the project, that would be appreciated, and I'm happy to talk about it. We're really excited. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. Yeah, sorry, I completely rambled from the initial answer, but yeah, there's potential in both. Cow waste generally has more energy potential. Yeah. So, sure.
How do you connect with individuals in Uganda who are trying to get these projects going? Where do you source the need, and soon as the government or administrative framework, which you must have had to navigate? I don't know, the advisory board was critical in establishing this connection. And the other part to that is, have you had much response or support from typical nonprofit charities that do kind of development work, or branded charities that also have on these projects directly?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. So the first one, anything that I didn't know or any capability that I didn't have, I tried to supplement that with the advisory board. I have no experience in Africa. I've never been there. I'm planning to go now. But what was key to us getting those contacts was that person on our advisory board who had done a project like that in Uganda. She worked for the United Nations. They did a pilot project. It was really successful. I brought her on board, and I told her I wanted to do something in Africa. I want to expand outside of Pakistan. So she was critical. So she has the connections to, like you said, the municipal government, talking to the education, the school board, because you have to get their buy-in to be able to build a facility. She knows the contractors there. So that was a critical component. In Pakistan, similar story. I'm from Pakistan, but I don't. It's different. It's different living in the city versus living in a village, and I didn't have contacts there. So again, you have to go through intermediaries to find the people who are the farmers there, who own the land there, who can donate their land to say, sure, Shift can build an energy dome. So all of that requires navigation and just hustling your network. That's what it was. So we were really lucky. So that was our in for Africa and Uganda, and that's how we're navigating that. But it's a challenge because it's a new jurisdiction, and every country, and even within the country, there's every region has their own kind of requirements. In Pakistan, it's more, especially in the villages, it's like the Wild West. People just come and do development work and leave. So you have to be very careful in terms of being able to supervise, make sure everyone's using the dome safely and things like that. But yeah, we were lucky with the contacts we had on our advisory board. To your second question, we've absolutely contacted multiple nonprofits. We've talked to, Plan Canada, or Plan International, sorry. We've talked to a few charities like Islamic Relief and, IDRF and some other charities. And, we're still in discussions with a lot of them. The feedback, and this is the unfortunate part of being both small and trying to do something big, is that our ask is actually too small. So I didn't talk about this, but those domes, each of those 10 domes that we've built, it costs $2,500. And it supports about 30 to 40 people. It supports about 4 to 5 homes, but those homes are densely populated. So it supports about 30 to 40 people. And so the economics of it is great. There's no maintenance cost. It lasts forever. It's concrete, it's brick. So the economics are great, but it's such a small ask that sometimes, one of the charities I spoke to, they just said, we love it, but we want to give you $100,000 to work with. Can you do something with that? I said, well, no, not yet. The school project is $30,000, for example. So these are not expensive projects. And so we've talked to a lot of these charities, but the feedback we get often is, come back when you're asking for 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, not so much 30 or 40 or 50,000. And so it's just a matter of having those discussions at the right juncture. We're just not there yet, but we hope to be there soon. Yeah, so it's all piping right now. So it would be like a PVC pipe that runs at the site of the dome. It's initially a little bit underground, and then it goes overground, and then it just kind of goes to the people's huts and homes. And the reason we do that is because when you compress the gas, it adds a very dangerous aspect to it. It becomes a lot more dangerous when you have compressed gas. In this case, if the gas stove is not being turned on, the methane gas in the dome just flares out. So it doesn't ever build up. Whereas if you have compressed gas and then somebody tries to light something near it, or they hit it, or an animal strikes it, there's more dangerous aspects to it. So we've kind of avoided that for now. That is interestingly something we're looking at, because what happens is the feedback we've gotten from some of these villages is that there's actually more than enough gas. So they have enough to cook 3 times a day, all the homes, every person. And then there's leftover gas. So then the question becomes, if there's leftover gas, can you, bottle it or compress it and then sell it somewhere else? In Pakistan, for example, some of their rickshaws and vehicles are actually powered by something called CNG, compressed nitrogen gas. And so you try to think, is there a market there to maybe sell this and make it self-sustaining? And those are the questions we're asking ourselves and looking into. But at this time, it's just a straight pipe to people's homes. That's in the back.
I really admire your drive and passion to make a difference.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
My question is, are there any toxins being released as part of
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So there is, one of the common contaminants in biogas is hydrogen sulfide. And so we have to be really careful about this, and it's something that we looked into when we talked to the contractors and the people who designed the domes. So, and we have a chemical engineer who is an advisor. So the risk, the short answer is the risk is minimal. The only way you would have sufficient contaminants that could actually hurt someone is if you literally turned on the stove 24 hours a day and shut all the doors and windows and sat really next to the stove and just covered it with a blanket and you in the stove. It would have to be extreme exposure. It would just never happen. And so that's the only time where there could be a health risk. But other than that, we did a lot of research into other projects that have been done like this, and there's never a risk with the contaminants in there. So it burns off cleanly. And we've even instructed and trained the people that are living in these villages that if you ever smell rotten eggs, that's the smell of sulfur. If you ever smell rotten eggs, that's the first thing to just open the doors and windows. But again, this is a fail safe that we'll never have to use. It's just such an extreme circumstance. So the short answer is no. It's actually a very safe process. It's been done around the world. If you look up biogas projects, online, you'll find multiple examples of this. It's a very safe. Very few contaminants. The only one is hydrogen sulfide, but again, it's such a remote risk, and you find ways to deal with it. So initially, it's the training. So making sure people know how to identify it if it ever happens, which again is a very low risk. The second thing that we're trying to do now is actually install sensors that would detect it in terms of parts per million. So one of our advisors told us, they agreed, saying that, listen, we understand the risk of that happening is remote, but you always want to be just extra safe. And so part of that is installing sensors that can, gas sensors that can detect some of these contaminants. But yeah, the short answer is it's very safe. If you were to see the actual operation like I was able to, it's actually amazing how safe and secure it is. And that's one of the benefits of it. One of the greatest things is that there's no moving parts in this entire infrastructure. I'll just go back to the kind of what it looks like in cartoon form. This is simplistic, but it actually is like this. This is a concrete dome, then it's a PVC pipe that goes to people's homes. There's no moving parts anywhere. The only thing that's not shown in this image is there would be kind of imagine a well, and in the well, the farmers just load the waste and mix it with water, and then it goes down the pipe into the dome. And because there's no moving parts, there's actually no maintenance required, meaning that no one has to go inside the dome and try to clean it or something. The waste actually rises and it'll go to like this other part that's not shown here. It's like an outer. It's basically a container that'll store the waste. It comes out of the dome. And so the farmers just take it and just throw it onto the fields. And because it's concrete, because it's bricks, there's nothing there that one, people would steal, because again, that's a big part of the reality there on the ground. And two, it's just something that, because there's no electronic parts or something moving inside the dome, it's less likely to break down. And so you don't need people on the ground constantly monitoring what's happening. It's, we do have people who check in every now and then, but it's just to make sure that people are getting the gas, everything is safe, that the farmers are complying, because sometimes the farmers are like, I don't want to actually do this. They have their own system of wanting to throw it into the fields, but so you have to train them to use the dome. It'll help with your community. So there's some training efforts there, but it's just such a simple yet elegant model, and that's what really appealed to me about it. So no maintenance required, and it's at this time the design doesn't have any moving parts, and that's on purpose. Going forward, we might, as we enhance the technology, there might be something more advanced about it. And then you'd have to deal with it in terms of whether you send someone who does maintenance every 6 months or a year. But as it stands, it's just done so, it's such a fixed structure that there's no maintenance required. Yeah, so that's a great question. So it's about 20 or 30 cows. Again, the output is a bit variable. I say output instead of waste, but the output is variable because every cow is different, depends on how much they're being fed and things like that. But generally we say if the community has at least 20 cows, that's enough for one dome. And that one dome is enough for 3-4 homes. And those 3-4 homes in total have about 40 people because they're just very densely populated communities.
How realistic is that in Pakistan?
Yep. Yeah. So these villages, sometimes they have like hundreds of cows, but they're separated into within the village. There's like mini clusters, and so there definitely are enough cows in Pakistan, but that's a barrier. So part of our scoping exercise when we try to find, well, which village can this work in, is how many cows do you guys have, right? Like that's a big question, because otherwise it just won't work. Or it becomes a question of, okay, well, can we take the cow waste from here, transport it to a central facility? And it becomes more challenging. But as it stands, every place that we've operated in has enough cows. And, if you're thinking about the future and where this could go, just imagine a dairy farm in Ontario, which has like 300 cows, right? There's farms not too far from here in London, Ontario that have 300 cows. And they could produce so much electricity from it. It's not even cooking gas anymore, because here in Ontario we don't really need cooking gas. They could produce so much electricity from it, it could actually power both the farm and then also sell it back to the grid. So there's a ton of potential there. But yeah, that's definitely a barrier. And so you try to find these pockets of villages that have enough cows. Maybe in the front.
Does it have to be cows, or can it be goats or another animal? And then how long does it take from the time you collect the waste for it to turn into usable gas?
Yeah, so good questions. It's sad that I know the answers to all these poo-related questions, but that's part of the exercise. And so, you're absolutely right. You can get it from other animals. There are actually projects in the United States that are doing it at poultry farms, so chicken poo. Again, the question becomes volume. And so cows generally produce a lot of waste. There's also a lot of cows in the world, and they're actually the biggest contributors to the methane emissions that we talked about. And so for all those reasons, that's you go after the biggest market, literally. And then as you get smaller animals, yeah, you can do it from chickens. There's a project in Waterloo, Ontario, I don't know if you've heard of this, that actually it's a public project where they're collecting dog poop in parks and using it. So they have receptacles that they've installed, the city's installed. I think Mississauga is actually doing this too. Don't quote me, but I think Mississauga is doing this, where they're going to install receptacles at public places that you can deposit the dog poop in there. And they'll use it, I believe, in a central facility to try to generate some output out of it. I don't know what it is, because again, it's such a small volume. If an entire city does it, it might be enough to do electricity or maybe turn it into fertilizer. I'm not sure. But the Waterloo project I've heard of for sure. And I think they were floating the idea in Mississauga. So that's interesting. And sorry, I can't remember your second question.
Like how long does it take from the time you collect the usable gas?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. So it takes about 5 days in ideal temperature circumstances. So the hotter it is, the better, because the heat actually promotes the cultivation of that bacteria. So in Pakistan, it would take about like 5-7 days. But the gas is being constantly, so that's the first, so day one, I build the dome and I put the waste in. It'll take a week for the first gas to come out. But after that, I'm putting waste in every day, right? The farmers are putting in waste every day. So there's gas every day. So there's never like, okay, we gotta wait till Friday to cook our meal. So it's every day. And so that's the beauty of it. And so one of the things we do is, you know, I touch base with our contacts in Pakistan. I just got a message a few days ago and saying, you know, everyone is getting sufficient gas. They're able to cook 3 times a day, no problem. There was an outage temporarily, and it was because the farmers weren't loading enough waste. It's been solved. So like, it's just a very continuous process. You know, if the farmers decide not to put the waste in on a particular day or 2 days, you know, a week after that, you might get lower gas output, but generally they're pretty good about it. So about 5 to 7 days.
And do you see where it might drive other economies, like maybe like women who might have spent time collecting, you know, sticks for a fire to you know, build energy for themselves? Do you see where people might be building their own businesses or maybe collecting the waste from farmers who don't actually want to make the trip?
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, there's so many offshoots that you could come up with, so many different business models. If somebody in Pakistan was feeling particularly entrepreneurial, they could put us out of business by just saying, you know what, give me all your cow poop. I'll come around with a truck and collect it all. And they could process it in some central facility if they really wanted to. And instead of giving it back to the community, they could probably just buy the waste from the community for like pennies and then sell it to you know, the city, or sell it to someone else who wants to use it. So there's definitely a bunch of business models that are out there that you could pursue. It just becomes a matter of like, not just who has the technical expertise, but it comes, especially in these villages, is who has the relationship. Because imagine me coming from Toronto, Canada, going into some remote village in Pakistan and saying, I'm going to come onto your land and build something, but don't worry, it's going to help you, right? Like, it's a tough sell unless you have an intermediary or you have those relationships. And so now, once people started seeing, when we built the first one, they were just kind of like, fine, let them build it. They're saying they're going to cover the cost. Once they saw the first one and what it did, then we had neighboring villages everywhere, like putting up their hand, we want one, we want one, we want one. And so, which is a great problem to have. Yeah, so there's definitely other ways to monetize it and think about like offshoot kind of opportunities and economies and businesses. For us, we're just trying to take it one step at a time and build it out this way and then see where it goes.
I know that methane gas comes from the food, so, and we know that methane gas is a greenhouse gas. So how much impact does that affect for the climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the statistics that I often quote is that methane gas is actually 30 times more dangerous in terms of to our atmosphere in terms of trapping heat than carbon dioxide. You know, one of the metrics, in addition to the life expectancy metric, one of the things we're trying to measure now is what is the like what volume of methane are we taking out of the atmosphere, and then to put it in more real terms, how many cars does that mean off the road every year? So we're trying to put it in terms that, you know, people can understand, and you know, we're still in the process of trying to finalize it. Again, I don't want to give numbers that we haven't fully validated, but like I can safely say we're talking about like our 10 projects, we're talking about thousands of cars off the road, and so it's a tremendous impact. You know, we're talking about 15% of greenhouse gas emissions come from animals. 60% of those are from cows specifically, and you put that math with the fact that methane is actually worse than carbon dioxide. All of that put together, you're talking about a very large component of climate change. And I think slowly now people are talking about this a lot more. You'll see more and more documentaries and books written about, you know, if we want to tackle climate change, forget cars for a second, talk about the agricultural and livestock industry, right? Talk about meat and dairy consumption, talk about how much waste and methane is being produced from these animals. And so I think we're getting there in terms of having the right discussion. In the past, I just feel like the focus has been so much on transportation, and it's actually not supported necessarily by the research, which says that, you know, you have to look at the major contributors, which is also agriculture. So to answer the question, you know, I don't have a specific number for you, but I would say it's meaningful. You're talking about thousands of cars, at least from the 10 projects that we have right now, and then so much more if you talk about the potential global impact of this.
So what I know that everything has an impact, positive and negative. Is there more positive or negative impact from this project?
Oh, it's definitely positive. I mean, I've never been asked if there's a negative impact from this, actually. You know, I can't think of any. I really can't. I mean, the negative impact is what you end up taking a little bit of, you occupy some land in terms of, like, you know, you need some space to actually build it. But even that, the dome is underground, so it's not wasting any space for the farmer. In terms of like the emissions you're capturing, like there's really no negative externality to this. This is all positive. You know, people will say, well, you're still burning the methane gas because you're burning it when you're using the cooking stoves. But again, when you burn methane gas, it turns into carbon dioxide, which again is 30 times less damaging. And so, you know, there's a lot of research behind the benefits of this and how much is it, you know, how this can help tackle climate change. Yeah, I can't think of any negative outcomes. I really, you know, I'm not trying to be biased. Actually, I'm trying to think about it. I think it's all positive outcomes from this, especially from a climate change perspective. Now, if you take a step back and you say, well, you're working under the assumption that you continue to need to have 1.5 billion cows in the world as part of the meat and dairy industry and so on. Yeah, I'm working under that assumption. Now, if you say that we as a species decide that we're going to dramatically reduce our meat and dairy consumption, so we don't need that many cows, and so is that a better alternative? Potentially. If all of us decided that we're going to cut our meat and dairy intake by half, that would probably have more of an impact than what I'm doing here. But what I'm saying is to get to that, to get us to reduce or change our diet that dramatically, it's a tough sell. And I think we're decades away from that. I might be wrong, but I think we're far from that. And I think for me, the way I think about it is, well, this is a problem we have right now, and this is the best way I can think of to resolve it. I hope that answers your question.
We have some online questions. We have about 3 questions here from our online viewers. The first one is from Bianca, and Bianca asks, would the biogas being brought into the home smell, or is there some sort of filtering system?
Yeah, so no filtering system and there's no smell. And I can say that because I was in the kitchen when we burned it, and I spent the entire day there. I ate the food that was prepared using that gas. I drank the tea that was made using that gas, and there's no smell whatsoever. The only smell you would smell is if you have a gas stove or if you have a barbecue or something, if you ever turn it on, you smell that kind of propane kind of smell, natural gas kind of smells like that. So there's no kind of rotten, there's no poo smell, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not going to smell like a washroom. It's not going to smell like a farm. The farm will smell like a farm. If you go near the domes, it'll smell bad. But the homes where it's being piped to, no, not at all, zero. Like I've been there. I spent the entire day. I spent 2 days in the villages. There's no smell at all, nothing.
Okay, and our second question is from Kim. Kim says, thanks for your presentation. Other than donations, does SHIFT need or try to get volunteers to help with projects? And if so, what skills would be the most needed to help?
Let me just put up, because I forgot to do this. So for anyone who wants more information, you can go on our website, shiftwastenow.com, or you can email me directly. Shift.com was taken, unfortunately. So was shift.org, and so I had to go with this. To answer the question, yeah, we're always looking for volunteers. And we've actually been really fortunate because, you know, I built the advisory team, but after that, anyone who joined our team was because they put their hand up. I actually didn't reach out to them. And so people with really amazing skill sets, far more qualified than I am, who reached out and said they were willing to help. So right now, the immediate need is someone who maybe has a background in fundraising or has some, we talked about this earlier, but someone who has connections maybe to other nonprofits in Canada or in Africa or in the Indian subcontinent, someone who's maybe worked in that kind of nonprofit grant writing world. That's, I think, the immediate need we have. You know, I'm not an expert in grant writing, and I don't think many people on our team are. We're learning the process of how to do it. but there's a certain art for anyone who's done it, there's a certain art and science behind how you write a grant. And so someone with a fundraising kind of expertise would be really helpful. But really, like anyone who reaches out, there's so many things we can do. Like whether it's someone who's really good at writing, maybe we could start a blog on our website. If there's someone who's good at graphic design, feel free to design the next page on our website, or design some sort of fundraising flyer. Someone who's good at social media, it'd be great. I don't want to post things all the time, or someone else on our team. Like it'd be great to get help with it. So I guess the answer is we're looking for all sorts of skill sets. So whoever the questioner is, feel free to email me. I'm pretty responsive, and we'd love to have more help. And that's actually how we've gotten to where we are now, is because people who I don't even know reached out and said, I really like what you're doing, and what Shift is doing, and can I help in some way? And then you sit down and you have a discussion about, well, what skills do you have and what gaps do we have, and how do you kind of match those two up? Sorry, I just wanted to pause. If there is a way to, while I'm answering questions, if there's a way to pull up the video on YouTube or something, I don't know if there is, but I'd love to be able to show it to everyone. Sorry, I put Matt on the spot there, but I'll let you figure it out while I field a few more questions. It's a short video. It's like 3-4 minutes. But it's really cool. Like I really want people to see it, because there's one thing for me to describe it and for you to actually hear it from the people. It's very powerful. And sometimes when, like it's tough sometimes when you're trying to so I didn't mention this, but Shift is not my full-time job. I actually have a day job. So I do this in evenings and weekends. So sometimes it's actually really tough. Like you're trying to balance everything. I have a family as well. And when I'll sometimes go back and watch that video and listen to the testimonials, and just like reinvigorates you again, because you're like, okay, I know why I'm doing this. I know the impact again. And so that's why I'm hoping the video can come up. If not, then, after the presentation, go on YouTube and just search up Shift Waste, it'll come up.
If we're not able to make the video work tonight, we will send it out to everyone.
That's even better. Thank you.
Okay. And our last question is from Michael in California. He asks, would a typical household septic tank generate enough gas to derive enough energy to power a house at night?
I don't have the answer to that question. My gut feeling, based on the readings that I've done, is probably no. I think the models that have worked with human waste have always been centralized models, meaning not just one person's septic tank for one house. It's 100 houses feeding into like a centralized facility, and then that's enough to power maybe half the houses or something like that. Rough math. Yeah, so I think if you're thinking like, I don't know, like a cottage up in Northern Ontario and you have a septic tank, I don't think it's enough to power your cottage. I think it'd have to be a more centralized model. But I don't have the exact answer, so I don't want to commit to that. I would say my gut feeling is it wouldn't work, but if they have that question, explore the answer and find out and make it work and put Shift out of business. That, the idea is to make the world a better place. It's not, we don't have a monopoly on doing that. And if there's a way for someone else to do it, we're happy to partner with them and work with them to do that.
Anyone have any more questions? Ontario farmers jumping at this opportunity? If not, what are the barriers?
So Ontario farmers, there's actually a Canadian Biogas Association, which Shift is applying to, and we're going to become a member of. So this is a known technology, and so some farms in Ontario, if you go on the Canadian Biogas Association website, they actually have a map of Ontario, and they'll show you farms that are doing this, dairy farms predominantly, I think they're all dairy farms. And so some people are doing it. The barrier though is, so not many farms are doing, there's only a handful in Ontario that are doing, and the biggest barrier is that it's actually on a commercial scale at a farm, it's very expensive. So I mentioned the 2,500, but that's the community scale level. If you're talking about for 300 cows, like a very big facility, one that can turn it into electricity, and then the electricity feeds into the grid, like you're talking about like a $500,000 kind of dollar project. So it's quite expensive for a farmer. It could be even more. And so the biggest barrier is green credits. And so to the extent that the provincial and federal government support or do not support that program, that has a big influence on how many of these projects come up. In the years when there were more generous tax credits and green credits and incentives to do this, you saw like a gradual increase in the number of biogas projects in Ontario. And the years that they weren't, you'll see a decline. And so that's the biggest barrier. It is a bigger cost footprint, but there are farms in Ontario that have done it. And so the question becomes, is there a way that you can make the technology so efficient that it becomes cheaper to do? And so the business case becomes easier to sell to the farmer. You say, okay, assume no credits at all. You can recoup the cost in 2 years or 3 years. And after that, you start making money because you'll power your house or your farm for free, and you'll have excess electricity to sell to the grid. And once you sell to the grid, you make money because the municipality or the province pays you back. So that's I think the gap that needs to be bridged, is how do you make it more economical for farmers so they think, I don't want to wait 5 or 10 years to recoup my cost of this investment. I get it back in 2-3 years. That's a much better outcome. And then you'll have farmers who are more, they care more about the environmental aspect. And so that propels them to do it versus the economics of it. So it depends. But there are a few farms that do it in Ontario for sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
So from an economic case, the business case, if I could summarize, maybe you want to add to it, is that you're trading methane emissions to carbon emissions, like in its impact. So that's one. The other is that you're kind of recouping energy that isn't being consumed. You're taking it out of the regular energy grid. That's, that you would have to get an energy source from like burning wood or something like that. So you kind of, is there anything else like from the environmental business case for it?
Oh, the environmental business case. Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. So the only other thing I would add to the firewood aspect is, and I didn't mention this, I should have, would be like you're preventing deforestation, right? So that's a big part of it. Yeah, no, I think you captured most of it. And then the only added economic benefit, not environmental benefit, to a farmer in Ontario, for example, or someone who has a large farm, would be that you now save money. You save money because you don't have to power your farm using the grid. You can just do it yourself. And you have excess electricity that you can sell back to the city or the municipality or the government. And people have done that in the past where they just generate so much electricity. They're like, okay, well, we don't need, we met 100% of our farm's requirements, sell the rest. And you sell the rest and it actually it can be quite substantial depending on the government incentives that are in place. So, but that was a great summary. Yeah, that's pretty much the main points. Oh, we got it going. Oh, perfect. I'm just going to try to do it on full screen. No sound? That's okay. I don't want to, I put Matt on the spot. I feel bad. That's okay. If you can, somebody can email it out, or you can go on YouTube and check it out. I think that'd be great. Yeah, I'm again really happy to be here. Thank you for your time and your questions. A lot of you came in really bad weather, and I appreciate that. And thank you for the thoughtful questions. And if there's any way that you feel we can continue the conversation, again, please email me. I'm always happy to talk to people who are like-minded and have ideas to contribute and solutions to help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fahad. And just a little token of our appreciation. Got my hands full here. This is for you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you so much.
And if you wouldn't mind just picking out a name there.
Oh, interesting. This is probably the best day to do a raffle because the odds of winning are so high because of the weather. All right, I won't look.
Brian Luna, is that right? So as Melissa said, she will send you the video, and you'll see that he's wearing that other t-shirt, which I saw last spring, and he promptly got a U of T shirt after that. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. I want to encourage you to stay informed and inspired and connected to UTM. Learn about more of our upcoming events on our website, www.utmutoronto.ca alumni. And coming up in the next few months, we've got a full roster of events that's happening. We've got a dining etiquette session coming up. We've got a Raptors game. We've got alumni spring reunion that's coming up. We've got lots of things. We have a forensic panel. There's lots of things that we're going to be bringing to you in the new year. And for those of you who like to participate in other ways, we have a mentorship program, and a couple of our mentors are here tonight as well. There are lots of things that you can stay involved with at UTM on career panels and mentorship. We have an ECHO panel coming up in November for all of you ECHO grads. We've got some great alumni coming in to talk to students and young alumni. So thank you so much for coming. Please be careful going home tonight. And if it's not too early, happy holidays.